Record now, and we are recording here.
Great. Then let's call the Port Orchard Council Finance Committee for July 14th to order, and we'll start with the financial report.
Thank you, Chairman. Hopefully everyone can see the agenda for tonight. We're going to go through the financial report. I emailed out to the full council the monthly financial report today. And so for this conversation, I think we'll just kind of revisit the sales tax report and the Treasury report. So I'm going to pull that open quickly as I can. And so for the second, through the second quarter, I guess I could say, sales tax has come in relatively well for us. We've been waiting to see how the June results would come into play. And as you see here, our year-over-year actuals, June was about 1.4% higher than its previous 2019 June numbers, which has fared really well for us, especially during the time of our concern with COVID. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit.
So Noah, that is actually April sales, correct?
Yes.
Yes. So there's, we'll continue to monitor, but when we talked back in April when COVID first hit, we were running risk scenarios for the months of April through December, all of which thankfully haven't come to fruition, as our sales tax collection has remained relatively strong over that 3-month period. And with our budget to actuals at 6.6% ahead for the first 6 months of the year. So far, everything is remaining on target, even with the event of COVID.
It's amazing.
It is. So we're going to continue.
Shopping local. I really believe it's our citizens shopping local.
I would concur with that, Rob.
Yep.
I think it's people going to our Lowe's and our Fred Meyer or Walmart rather than driving up to Silverdale or wherever else they might have been going before.
Well, in April, Silverdale wasn't open. The mall wasn't open. I mean, your only option was to shop here locally, really.
Or online, where we capture the sales tax locally.
Correct.
Yeah.
Noah, without getting anything individual, are there particular segments of our economy that are below our expectations and other segments that are higher, or do you actually do budgeting to that level?
We typically don't budget to that detail. I mean, we will look at it and consider it, but we don't break it up that heavily. Now, it's something we can do as we're getting kind of better tools and resources to look at the data and understand the data better, especially being on a different kind of accounting structure. We can do that. But what we can say is that when we looked into the data, we did see it was mainly our big retail box stores that were doing very well, and the other stores not so well. But the pros outweighed the cons.
I guess one of my thoughts looking at these numbers that came in better than we projected, and we have at least what I'm going to say 3 significant car dealers. I was wondering, if I have thought that they provided a great source of sales tax revenue.
We've got a box home improvement store though that is exceeding. We're on recording, so I'm not going to tell you how many times, but it's a big number.
Right. Due to the confidentiality agreements, we can't really say much as far as getting into the detail.
Right.
Specifically because if we call a particular segment, you kind of know who they are just because it was such a limited number of businesses. Yeah.
Correct.
So overall, this is all really good, positive news for the city of Port Orchard. We're going to continue to see what happens in July. But as the chair pointed out, June revenues from April I would expect May, so July did be similar, maybe on budget again. That's kind of when all the stimulus money was released. People were out there spending money. Unemployment still being dispersed through the end of July. So I've kind of started to adjust my thinking on when we might see the impact of COVID. And it really is probably going to be once those unemployment checks stop, which gets us into the fourth quarter of really 2020.
October, November.
Yeah. That's when I think we'll see, less stimulus activity going on at the retail side if the unemployment doesn't continue and if there's no other stimulus package to come forward. But that gets us through the year pretty well. And at this point, we're almost 80% of our original budget for the biennium. And year to date, we're nearly 7% above our budget for 6 months. So we got wiggle room to work, and everything is working really well on the sales tax side. Now, when we look at REIT, we can see that year to date, compared to budget, we received our complete budget now. We've eclipsed it with this month's collections. We are at 104% of our biennial budget, which is great. So we met that goal. When we compare year to year, we're actually down 12%. So what does that tell us? I don't know yet. We're still trying to think through what that means going forward. But when we compare again to the budget, we're still 30% above the budget because of how we budget. We don't budget real aggressive with our REIT funds. And so you can see that we have another 6 months of collections available to us, and we are ahead of our budget at this point.
What that means is we budgeted wisely.
We can blame Mr. Bond somehow for this. It has something to do with real estate, building permits.
We're going to credit Mr. Bond as we move forward through the rest of this biennium budget.
Probably.
So all real good news on the sales tax and REIT front. I'm going to quickly flash forward to our cash and investment summary, which is in the email that I sent out today. Again, I'm hoping you guys can see the cash investment summary balance screen in front of you. All our funds are very healthy, as you can see. We got $6.5 million in the general fund, street funds, real healthy. I mean, I'm really happy about that. Stabilization fund, there's not a fund I would point to that I'd say, hey, this is a concern at this moment in time. So this is, again, another positive indicator of us doing well for the remainder of this fiscal year and working towards our next biennial budget of different policies that we can adopt and keep everything moving forward. Are there any questions on the cash investment summary or on the monthly report that we sent out?
That looks good.
Great.
Good. So the next topic on the agenda I wanted to cover was, as we're moving into the budget season, it's time to start engaging council. Again, I want to remind the Finance Committee that our initial plan prior to COVID was to have a retreat in early February, April. Of course, that couldn't occur. And so we're regrouping, rethinking how we can strategically engage with the council, get some policy direction, get some goal direction for the budget. So we intend on talking about that at the next couple of meetings. In particular, the first couple of meetings, we're just going to talk about the schedule for the biennial budget, and then we'll look at different policy considerations. So for us, the most important thing that we want feedback currently is on our financial policies. We've talked about this before, that we needed to update our financial policies. They're from 2012, and so they're just a little bit outdated. Most of this policy, and again, I will share this with the Finance Committee after this meeting, I'll send around for you guys to review and look at. Most of the corrections at this point, the updates, are really housekeeping items, changing titles from Treasurer to Finance Director, changing terminologies from GAAP accounting to BARS cash accounting. But the one item I did want to kind of have the broader discussion about today is on our reserve policies. So as you recall, we have a section here, looks like 7, where we have 2 sets of policies. One's for what I'm calling the working capital policy and one for a stabilization fund. Currently, these policies only are for the general fund. We, in the last biennial budget, when we redid our fund structure and created the operating fund, stabilization fund, debt service fund, and capital fund for enterprise funds, we put some money into the reserves or into the stabilization accounts for those enterprise funds. It wasn't a lot. It was maybe 30 days of operating. We just wanted to put some seed money in so we could continue to develop what that fund structure looks like and what these policies are. So here I am coming back to you now to say, hey, it's time to really flush out what that policy looks like for the enterprise funds and look at the calculations to see how you feel about them. So I want to start with the working capital policy first. Again, the working capital is really about cash flow of our operating funds. It's money in cash that we need in each of our operating funds to pay bills, to pay payroll, to pay supplies as revenues are coming in and expenses are going out. Our current policy is measured at 5%, or it was kind of a long formula. It was at 5% of our annual budgeted operating revenues. I'm proposing moving that 5% to 12.5%. And what the 12.5% equates it to is 45 days of working capital. So nearly a month and a half of cash available to cover bills. When I compared, I'm gonna pull up a quick chart here so you can actually have some numbers to kind of think about. Let's load here, working capital. When we looked at can everyone see the Excel spreadsheet now?
Yeah.
Okay. So when we look at the working capital current policy, it's at 5%. We do not have a working capital for our street fund or any of our enterprise funds. So again, this is something I'd like to propose that we change in this update. But the 5% equates to about $525,000. And that is not a lot of money that barely meets a payroll on any given week. So what I'm again proposing is typically in the municipal sector, you have a range of 45 days to 90 days of working capital available as a policy target. I'm proposing on the lower end of 45 days just to kind of get us started. At 45 days, that equates to 12.5%. And for the general fund, that would mean we would have $1.3 million as a policy for cash flow funding in the general fund. I'm proposing that this also be applied to our street fund as well as our enterprise fund. So I just kind of want to pause there and let you all have a chance to kind of see the numbers and the range here of calculations. So the range can go from 45 days to 90 days. On the general fund, 1.3 million to 2.6 million.
So Noah, my question would be, we wouldn't expect, so we not adopt these new policies that put reserves in place that we don't have at all in some funds and more than double another fund, the general fund. We wouldn't expect to do that. I mean, we took a number of years and a number of budgets to get to that goal. Would that be the process for this? Because I mean, it would really kick the wind out of our next budget that we're really trying to probably do a flat budget with.
Well, I think we can achieve both. Again, this is for cash flow purposes. If I look at our current policy, we couldn't meet payroll or expenses at our current policy of 5%. Luckily, we just covered the cash and investment report, and we saw that our general fund has $6.5 million of cash in that account. So what this would mean during the budget process is that I would budget the cash flow amount as my ending target goal. So $1.3 million would be what I want to end the year with, I want to begin the year with, and end the year with. And that's how we could kind of manage the budget. Anything above that cash flow target is additional funds that we can use for capital, can use for stabilization, can use for other projects. But the idea is to get to a solid financial position where we've fully funded our stabilization account for the current expense fund, for general fund, and our street fund. and we have a cash flow policy, which gives us a target of how much cash that we need to have to cover our bills. At that point, we're pretty safe from a cash flow perspective to meet our current requirements and have emergency cash available. So everything above that is when we start to talk about our other needs. And that really gets us to a benchmark to know, okay, are we in good position or not? If I come to the council and say, hey, we have $6.5 million in our general fund currently, and our cash flow target is $1.3 million, that's a real quick indicator to say, hey, we have plenty of cash to meet our cash flow needs. And so then the question becomes, okay, what do we want to do with the remaining surplus? What is that intended to be used for? Again, that's when we talk about our other needs for the street projects or other capital projects. Can we start to use that money as one-time revenue? Do we use that money to add to the general fund budget or the street fund budget? So it changes the conversation a little bit, but I do believe it is an attainable goal in this next biennial budget because I can see that we do have the cash available, and with a slight adjustment to the policy, it just changes the target as far as what I would require to have in cash.
Noah, do you think 45 days is adequate or is that minimal?
I think it's on the minimal side. I think it's a step in the right direction to at least establish what we're looking for. I mean, you guys have seen the claims come through now pretty regularly, weekly. You see we're spending about $300,000 on average in accounts payable. We're spending about $300,000 in payroll every 2 weeks. So $1 million a month, it's a little tight, but it certainly is better than 5%.
Yeah, no, I agree. I guess I'm wondering if we shouldn't just move to the 60-day and shoot for that. And I mean, 45 days really isn't going to do much if we ever get into a tough situation. I appreciate this isn't a reserve account, but this is just your working fund.
Correct.
Right.
You don't have a lot of time to react to any changes.
Right. Where do you think you're going to end, for example, if the rest of the year comes in on budget, where do you think the general fund will end the year, just roughly know? If it's at 6.5 now, is that we're going to end basically there?
I think it's going to end probably around $4 million.
Okay.
If everything can remain stable for us from sales tax and property comes in on budget, and we're able to pull the trigger and execute and fund the stabilization accounts that we put in the mid-year biennial budget. So again, we put it in the budget, but I said I would wait to the end of the year to make those transfers to fund those stabilization accounts until we have how everything is settling out. Just, with only 6 months to go, as long as everything can hold steady at our current revenue and expense pace, I think we can pull the trigger, fund our stabilization account, and get it to the level we determined at the time. And they would give us about $4 million. And at that point, then you're starting to think, okay, great. Now as I'm going into the next budget, I have a different target, and I know I have lots of needs that are going to be presented to the finance committee and the council as far as capital requests, employee requests.
We've talked about our streets and the need to fund our street.
Right.
Right. Absolutely. So just for sake, I mean, where I'm sitting here today, the 5% is ridiculous. I think 45 is ridiculous. I think 90 days, I don't know, it's kind of a minimum target. I mean, just from a fiscal responsibility thing. So let's assume, we ended the year at 4. If we were to fully fund at 90 days, right, it's more just of a cash flow exercise. I don't think it cripples us to be able to do what we need to do. It's just simply a working capital policy. And
Correct.
So I think the 90-day target's achievable.
So if you look at the 60-day number, quickly adding those in my head, those come up to about $4 million, which is what Noah said he anticipates to end the year with.
No, that's just general fund and ending balance, not the sum of all of those funds.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, then I would tend to support what you're saying, Sean.
Yep.
I would have no problem going up if we're talking that 2.6 million at 90 days.
Right. Now, again, if a policy like this is detrimental, if there's unintended consequences, I'd love to hear from Noah or mayor staff on that. But if it's not going to be a detriment to to me, this is just a cash flow exercise. And I think it's the right thing to do to show everyone that we have a 90-day working capital policy if there isn't downstream, unintended consequences of that.
Yeah, it doesn't lock us into anything. It just provides us a target.
Yep.
And that's the target I would shoot for as I develop the budget.
I don't have a problem with 90 days. My only hesitation is just, right now, everything looks rosy, but as we just pointed out a minute ago, when we looked at sales tax, we're not going to really notice a direct impact, at least as it relates to the unemployment running out until October, November, December, that time frame.
Yep.
That's all.
Yeah.
Just as a caution, but if this doesn't lock us into, I think 90 days better than 60, obviously.
Yep. And again, if we encounter something in the future, we need to move off of it. But I think it's just great from a policy standpoint that this is, in normal times, this is our goal and this is our policy. And there's always exceptions to everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can draft the policy in a way, that makes it soft, that this is the range we're targeting. We prefer to the upper end as we develop a budget, just soften it up. Again, it's a target goal. And if you think about when we started this biennial budget, we started the 19-20 biennial budget with a target of $2 million to start as our cash flow. It was just because what we were anticipating to begin the fund with. So this is a little more refined, gives us a little better target, a little better handle on what metrics are important. So and again, we don't have to make any decisions today. This is kind of get a blush or reaction to see if we're in the right direction. We can start to build these policy directions into our budget scenarios. And over the next couple months, I will bring forth the full updated financial policies to be adopted. But this time we're not updating them today. So we have time to really flush through and kind of see some scenarios play out, as John has pointed out, that we're not sure exactly what's going to happen over the next couple months. So we have time.
No, the one question about, these reserve policies, and I appreciate it's a goal. But as the mayor pointed out, some of these other ones, we're talking about street funds and things of that nature. How do those budgets, how do you project or think, if all else stays as they are, how we'll end up with those?
Yeah, the street funds, the most challenging, of course. I think our enterprise funds are really in good condition. So I don't think those are gonna be a real problem for us this year, this biennial period. It's really the street fund just because there isn't a whole lot of revenue dedicated to the street fund. Even the TBD money, I'm not budgeting that in this next biennial period until we know how that's gonna be resolved. Now, again, we're still collecting it, we're still holding it, but I'm not placing that $200,000 or $300,000 into the budget. So what that means is that those funds are going to have to come from the general fund to supplement any street activity work.
Right.
So that's why I'm kind of looking at these together as the general fund, street fund. These are good, cash flow targets for both that are operating. And then, the street fund will impact the general fund. But it always has. So that's nothing new.
One thing I liked, which I heard you say, is whether we took the 45 or the 60 day and set it as our minimum, if we had a broad policy that had a minimum, whether it's the 45 or 60 day, with a goal of the 90 day. So we've got to have the minimum, but we're striving for the 90. And which gives us some latitude, in that policy.
Yeah. And I would actually push it further. I mean, again, we might have to do it now, but from a policy perspective, I'd love to see it someday that the minimum be 90 with a goal of 180, right? I mean, it's.
I'd like to get there too, but
Right.
I'd like to do it in steps so that we don't.
I just
I'm with the
wouldn't.
mayor.
Yeah, I am too. I just wouldn't support with the cash that we have right now, knowing that it's not going to impact anything. I would take 45 days off the table. I wouldn't even discuss that number.
Yeah. Okay.
I agree.
Okay. All right, that's good direction. And then I'm assuming you'd like me to apply this same policy to the enterprise funds as well. Again, these are our water operating, our storm operating, and our sewer operating.
Yep.
Okay. That's good. That's helpful. That helps us to, as we're kind of thinking and building the budget, what our targets are. So that is one policy in our document, is the working capital. So this language reflects that. And again, based on this conversation, I'll update the language to make it softer, to address kind of the council's direction or the committee's direction. The other policy is our stabilization fund. Again, the verbiage in here was a little hard to kind of track real quick. So we're gonna simplify the verbiage and again apply it to our enterprise funds as well. Now the enterprise funds, the reason, okay, well let me back up. So our current policy is we have 2.3 million in our stabilization account if everything goes well at the for the remainder of the year, and we can fully fund our stabilization account. We'll have $2.3 million, which puts us at 17% or 2 months. Again, a good range is 90 to 45 to 90 days or 1 to 3 months in a stabilization account. So I just put up some numbers so you can see if you wanted to change the target. You don't have to, but that's where we'll be at 2 months. And if we wanted to target 3 months, again, we'll be at 3.4 million. I'm a little hesitant to go to 3.4 million on our general fund and street fund as a 25% target, only because with stabilization, that money is locked in a little bit tighter. Cash flow is for cash flow purposes. It's a target, it's a goal. This actually has specific requirements that need to be met in order to access that capital. Maybe over the next 8 years, we kind of develop a larger target, but until I think this next biennium shakes out and we do some other things that we really desperately need to do and fund, I think that maybe 2 months is a good balance for now.
Noah, what are some of the examples of what we'd have to go through to use that?
Well, let's pull up the policy. So in the policy, here is what we state as qualifying events. The state of Washington federal government formally declared disaster emergency. So COVID qualifies. A natural disaster, urgent, jeopardizes public safety, impedes commerce, or threatens additional damage to city infrastructure. You know, you can think of the hurricane, the tornado, anything that has infrastructure. Unforeseen events or situations outside the scope of contingency planning or planned normal course of government operations. Pretty vague there, pretty broad. And then of course the last one, active war, terrorism, or declaration of martial law. So there's some pretty big lanes to kind of navigate there in the event of something that we would come back and say, hey, we really need to tap the stabilization account.
Noah, is there any benefit, and maybe there's not, maybe it needs to be different language, but on one hand, we're talking about a 60 or 90 day reserve, and now we're talking about 17% or 25% reserve. Is there a benefit to having the kind of the same language where we're always looking at a 3 month? Again, I mean, I think that the 25% of annual makes sense because, you know, you might have revenues, the timing of things come differently. So it's a better reflection to take 25% of an annual target versus 3 months, because what 3 months are you looking at, right?
Right. Yeah.
But then if that's the case, you would do the same thing with our last policy and have it 25% of annual versus 90 days.
Yeah, I'm happy to craft it anyway. I only put the different kind of measurements of days versus percentages just to allow people to think about it differently. I agree that having a consistent measurement as we talk about the different policies is a much better way to go.
Yeah.
And I think the days only resonate with people because they can think about that a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Where percentages, you got can go, well, what does that really mean?
Yeah.
So
But, I mean, go ahead.
I just have a question, just so I understand. The days we were talking about, that money is our cash flow money. That's where we would end up our cash balance. Okay, and now outside of that is the stabilization account. It is not included in that.
Correct.
So in essence, if we had the 17% or the 2,300,000, and say our cash flow was 4 million, we would basically have 6,300,000 if to work with if we had to.
Yeah, or otherwise said, we have 5 months worth of reserves.
Correct. It's just the one we can't access that way.
Right.
mean, we have,
without a major event of some type. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when the
and-
conditional steps in action.
right.
And hearing what Noah just said, just the concern of raising this too quickly, you know, I'm more comfortable with that 2-month target here because of what we just did. Like if we could get to that 90-day, right?
Right.
Because I think these are, you know, they're connected to some extent. They're not totally independent of one another. And so I could see where 3 + 2 is 5.
Yeah. We could also toy with, I mean, that 17% happens to be 2 months, but each biennium over the next few budgets to start ticking, you know, versus trying to take an 8% bite, you take a 1% bite every 2 years and you inch that, you know, inch it forward versus trying to take, you know, eat the elephant all at once.
Well,
Yeah,
you
the
gotta
problem
keep in
with that
mind
is you're
too,
not
as we
keeping
go
up with
forward-
inflation. We're going to outspend it though, Rob, right? Our costs of doing business are going to go up more than 1%. We have to
But
outpace
it'll be 17 or 18 or 19% of the operation. So it is going to rise with inflation and our overall budget. If we're trying to get a higher percentage of our overall budget, that's one way we could move
see what
it
you're
a
saying.
little bit.
Okay, I thought you just said increase it by 1%. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, it's already
Yep.
it's 17% of
Yep.
the overall budget.
Yep.
Okay.
So at least for the general fund street fund, that's kind of my initial feeling on it. Now the enterprise funds, I would lean more towards at least starting with 25%. And the reason is because they're enterprise funds and we have some significant infrastructure needs over the next couple of years, water system improvements, sewer system improvements. And when we go out to borrow, these are the kind of things they're going to look at is what kind of reserves levels you have. And of course, with a 25% reserve level, that's going to be a much stronger credit. So I'm looking at this as the longer term borrowing costs. How can we lower that? Establish a stronger upfront reserve policy for the enterprise funds is in line with other municipalities, how they treat enterprise funds to begin with. And hopefully it can lower our cost of borrowing.
I absolutely agree. Well stated. Which is why, as a whole, we want all these targets to be, I think, in time at a minimum of 3 months, 90 days, 25%, whatever you want to call it. I just think it's the right thing to do. And it's just, we'll need your guys' guidance on how quickly we can get there so there aren't unintended consequences of that policy. But I think we could all agree that as a policy goal, that's a solid place to be.
Mayor, Beck, John, you guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no,
I'm fine with that.
Okay. So then what I think I heard is for the enterprise funds, I could target a 25% policy. For the general fund, continue to target that 2 months, 60 days policy.
Yeah, and then maybe even a plan of how we're going to get to the 25%, right? That over the next, you know, 2 biennial budgets or whatever, that we have a plan in place to try to achieve where everything's at that 90-day mark or that 25% mark.
Why don't we just set a policy that this is going to be revisited every budget cycle?
There we go.
Yeah, yeah. And it should, because we should report back to, you know, where are we at with our targets? You know, are we on target, below our target?
Yep.
but this stabilization fund for your enterprise funds, those dollars again can only be accessed under those 4 or 5 bullet points.
Yes, at this time, unless there's something else that you guys are thinking of that you would like to have as a different qualifying event.
Okay.
So, I mean, again, that's some policy development we can work on. I can look to see if there's other things that we want to include. At this point, I was just going to slide it into our current structure.
That third bullet is pretty general.
Mm-hmm. Would that capture, I mean, things that would concern me in those enterprise funds? We have, you know, a major sewer line or lift station or a water tower, some event, you know, as long as that captures that, that's where we need to go tap those reserves and declare an emergency and go build a water tower as quickly as possible because we lost a water tower.
Well, but to Noah's point, in an event like that, we're not going to be able to cash flow that anyway. Those reserves are going to be used to support probably debt service, right? I mean, I think that's the more practical side of it.
That would
If
be
we had
the
to build a
idea,
new
yeah.
tower, that stabilization account's not going to sniff it, but we can use it to leverage that to
Mhm.
put the total finance package together.
And I think again, when I share this document, if you read over the qualifying events and start to break it down, I think it gives us wide lanes to walk through as the situation you just described, Rob. If you look at the bullet number 2, an
Yeah.
urgent event that jeopardizes or threatens additional damage to city infrastructure. I think that if it's water, sewer, storm, street, I mean, I think we can get there in a lot of different capacities.
Well, and public safety, all of those events would affect public safety.
Mhm.
Correct. Yeah. So I think when these were drafted, they were drafted with kind of a wide net in mind. That yes, we're locking the funds down, but we can get to them
Mhm.
if we need to.
John and I were involved in this the first time.
Well, then you
Nice
wrote
work.
it very
That's
well.
why they're so good.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. All right. So you gave me good policy direction. I'm gonna continue to work on the language, and I'll share that with you once incorporating kind of your guys' thoughts today. And I will use what we talked about during the budget process as kind of the targets for our stabilization accounts, as well as our beginning fund balance targets for our enterprise funds and our general fund street fund.
Yeah.
So that,
And I'm just thinking of, through this, just future councils, right? Not everyone, I think, looks at finance the same way. And so as it becomes a fiscal policy of a city, right, that other city council members almost kind of inherit that theme. Whereas before, look at what our council and previous councils have inherited. And I'm not saying it's all by choice, right? It's economy has to deal with it too. But boy, to walk into a 5% reserve, that's a real scary place to be. And so I think to figure out a roadmap to get to these 90-day targets is just, it's the minimum of the right thing to do.
I can remember a time when we had about $35,000 in the bank and we were living off property taxes, and it wasn't, and we were in an economic downturn. It was ugly. And
That's scary.
That's what drove
scary.
us to get to where we're at.
Correct.
Which is a
Correct.
huge first step. And now that we've funded that, we're taking the next big step, which is
That's
the right
right.
thing.
Yep.
So the next topic on our discussion is council goals. Again, this would have come more out of the retreat, but I don't want to lose sight of it. At least as we're again developing the budget document and what's important to the council to talk through. So I just want to remind this group again, as we talk about this over the next couple of meetings, what the council said the goals were for the last biennial budget, and do those still make sense for us now?
No, when you say meetings, are you talking about the council meetings or committee meetings?
Council meetings. Yes, we have a
Okay,
plan to discuss this at the study session on the 21st. And I think we talked about over the next 3 council meetings in July. We wanted to kind of hit some budget policy discussions. So again, this is putting forth what we have in our current budget as the role and council roles. So I just want to put this up and kind of get you guys' feedback whether you want to look at changing it for the next biennium or what it is you want to focus on from the council's perspective. And I know from the transportation committee, that's kind of a new committee that we didn't have in place in the prior biennium. So perhaps we want to kind of fold in to our policy goals, transportation, investing in a preservation program, committing to pavement maintenance. Now that we've kind of are closing off on Tremont, I don't know if you want to kind of fold those concepts in. And again, I'm glad we got Nick here because Nick can also read these and if he has any thoughts on anything that we're actually doing that we might want to incorporate into the policy goals.
Yeah, this might be an opportunity to memorialize the fact that our efforts at communications has gone to a new level, and so maybe there's something I hear about outreach to all of the city stakeholders, including our citizens. That maybe that's a nice way to memorialize that. We're trying to do all we can to communicate.
That was actually a central theme of the city's comprehensive plan as well, was just all of these different connections that we are making, whether it's communicating to residents or agencies or, just communicating in the community.
Mm-hmm. And so it's just maybe add that as a 5th bullet point, just so it's memorialized. But again, that can be discussion for the entire council. That's just the first thing
Yeah,
that
that's
comes to my mind.
Yeah.
I think it's a suggestion, but
Yep.
I would hope we do that with the full council.
Yep, absolutely.
And
Like
no,
a good suggestion, but sorry,
Yeah.
Matt, go ahead.
well, these are fairly broad brushstroke goals. They're not specific, so I'm not sure something specific would be appropriate at this level. We may want to incorporate it somewhere else.
Well,
I
earlier
agree
you talked
with
about the
that.
council visioning.
Yeah, it's a
Section.
vision.
This is a vision, that's right.
Yeah,
It's a vision where we raise the bar and honor the past, but not live in it. It's a vision where we communicate. It's a vision where, yeah.
So I think that communication actually falls into building connections with outside partners, whether that's our public partners or citizens.
Yep.
yeah, that'd be a good place to put that.
Yep.
But I think we need to be captured, but I don't know that it's in these 4 bullets. But I think there's a desire and a commitment from the city council that I've heard that we're going to do a better job maintaining and preserving our streets and
Yes.
elevating our communication standards.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think at this point, trying to complete some projects, i.e. the pedestrian path.
So
I think
yeah, go ahead, Rob.
I was just going to say, there's 2 bullets that could come from that. One, completing the projects that we have, in the pipeline around, that we're, and planning for because, the lead time to get money is so far out there. We've got to be consistently planning for the next round of projects. So, and planning for the future.
I mean, like talking about Bethel.
Yeah.
I guess what I would do is somehow incorporate in there that we are, I don't know what word I want, but we acknowledge the need to maintain and preserve our mature neighborhoods as well as our growth neighborhoods.
Well, and honestly, as I read this document, I think it's titled wrong. I think this is more of a vision type of a statement, these bullet points. And Beck, what you just said, and John, you just said, those are more specific goals. And
Right.
I think goals can be readopted with each, biennial budget. And so this might be titled council vision, which then leads us to identifying goals every biennial budget. And now we're more specific on what you just said.
Right on.
Yep.
Did you capture those 4 bullets there, Noah?
Well, I recorded it on Zoom, so I got.
There you go. You captured it. Okay.
Yeah, and I think I just wanted to put this out there again. Start you thinking about this. I want the whole council to start thinking about this, because right now this isn't our budget document as the council goals. So maybe it's not the council goals for the next biennium. Maybe it is something else, and maybe we want to change kind of how we represent the council goals for the next biennial budget, what that looks like, what that is.
Yeah, I think it's 2 separate documents, as Sean said. I think this is the vision that we've established that we work from to develop our goals.
Yeah, this is 30,000 feet, and our goals, we need to be more specific, time bound, and tie them to our biennial plan where possible. Some of them will span a couple biennial budgets, as Rob just alluded to, but those are more goal oriented and
Totally agree.
Okay, good. This is good feedback. Then the last thing I wanted to share with you guys is the calendar. So here's kind of, here's my mouse. Get it up there. There we go. Here is the current budget calendar for our biennial period. Again, in June, which just ended, we've been working on updating the comprehensive plan. Been working on our transportation impact fees, working on updating our water and sewer capital facilities plans, or actually our CIP. And so this one is actually going to have to move to July, and developing the budget schedule. Hey, check that off. For July, this is what I intend to work with the full council and the mayor on. Again, updating our financial policies. We started the conversation today to get guidance, looking in about our council's goals, and financial policies. And then once we kind of have some direction from the council on the goals, the mayor will talk with the department heads about where we're headed for the 21-22 biennial period, what we're going to focus on. During July, we'll also roll out the mid-year report. We just did the monthly report, and so I'm going to follow up with the second quarter or mid-year look just to give it a different angle rather than the month-to-month look. We're going to start to put together our salary and benefit projections, which the CPI for all our labor contracts just came out, and the annual CPI adjustment was 0.9%, so less than 1%. But in our agreements, in our contracts with all our union reps, we have a floor, I think, of 2%. So we will build the floor of 2% into the salaries going forward. But that data just came out, so we're working on building those salary and benefit projections. And again, this will lead us into our August month, where we'll ask the department, we'll push out a budget to all our department heads, ask them to provide the detail of their requests and what they're looking for, putting together revenue estimates. Again, now that we have some kind of direction on the fund balance targets, that'll be helpful for ending fund balance projections and beginning fund balance projections. We'll actually set the schedule to meet with the department heads and the mayor and kind of walk through their requests. And then the mayor will develop his budget, present his budget to the finance committee and council. We'll do an exercise, again, work with all our department heads on their budget requests, set up the meetings to fully flush out what the council's budget is going to be. And then by October, we'll be rolling forward and having a good preliminary budget fully developed for the public to read and understand. And then we'll continue to have our public revenue sources hearings and all our other meetings to get through the month of October, adopting our property tax levy. And the goal would be to have the full budget ready to be adopted in November. So we're trying to do a lot of upfront work to get prepared for October, November. Now we're starting a little bit earlier, but not too much.
Yeah,
when on those salary adjustments, when do those go into effect? Is it January?
January 1st. Yep, January 1st.
Where we had callers 2 to 4, and when we did the budget, the economy or those negotiations, the economy was running really hot. So
yeah, no, I know. I'm just thinking that right now we're not in a very good position to change that. But if everything goes to heck in a handbasket towards the latter part of the year, I don't know. We may want to ask the unions to revisit that.
we start negotiations. The agreements expire next year, so we'll be negotiating.
Well, I know, but we're talking about wages for 21, and if the budget, the economy goes sideways, we're pretty fortunate right now.
Mm-hmm.
But if this budget or the economy does go sideways, we need to be prepared to at least address it.
Yeah.
See if they're willing to talk about it.
One thing I talked to Debbie about, since we are exceeding the CPI, we're doing the salary survey work, and we need to make sure that this 2% is captured in the salary survey document. We're stepping above the market, and how does that affect us and our peers, so that we're capturing that also.
Yeah, other comment I was going to make, I love the fact that we're trying to get this accomplished and have this adopted in November. I know in years past this has bled into December, and with all of the unknowns out there right now, I love that we're not pushing it to, that final or a special meeting in December.
The only problem with it, Sean, is, as we just talked about with sales tax, we may not know the full impact until the latter part of the year. So we're kind of going down the path of everything is
It's only 30 days, John. I mean, it's only 30 days. I'd rather have that 30-day cushion than,
well, right? I agree, but we may need that 30 days to better understand what's the true economy is going to be.
Yeah.
But
And now we have it, right? We have that buffer though. I mean, our goal for the calendar is to do it, so we have that additional buffer.
Right. I don't want necessarily, we should be hanging our hat on it has to be November if we need to wait a month just to
Correct.
see better what's going on.
Just from a target, right? Because if
Yeah,
whenever
no,
you
from
set
target, I
targets,
think
you
it's
ever
great.
end up, yeah, you end up bleeding all the way to the deadline. So it's just great that this target provides for another 30 days should we need it.
Should we need it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, it's important to remember that this is one of the benefits of adopting a biennial budget, because we're looking at a 2-year span. So yes, we're going to be forecasting sales tax on an annual basis, but 2 years of sales tax revenue will buy us time to get into the next year. So the 30 days, I'm not so worried about that as I am. Once we have a biennial budget, you can get into, first, second quarter of your new biennial budget and really make some adjustments. So again, another benefit of a biennial budget is puts less stress on the next following year after you adopt a budget. You can really maneuver a little more swiftly.
We've historically been very conservative, and Noah and I have been talking about some really conservative numbers again. It's always easier to find ways to spend money when you've got excess than trying to squeeze things partway through the process.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think we should move forward with that. I don't want to be Debbie Downer. It's just that,
Yep.
we're in unprecedented times. We just don't know what's going to happen with the economy, whether it's going to spring right back or if it's just going to
Yep.
chug along and be back to 2009. So
Yep. Absolutely.
that's all.
I hear you.
All good comments. So that's all I had for today's meeting. Again, a gentle lead into budget conversations just to get the juices flowing, as we're going to be talking about the next couple weeks about it.
Great.
Great reports. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And by the way, I really appreciated that revenue summary that you published. I thought that was great. It's kind of all inclusive. So, all right. Anything for the
All right.
go to the order?
I don't. Nick, do you have anything you want to share?
No, nothing tonight. I guess one thing I'll mention is when I saw the REIT numbers, I will tell you there's a potentially big fish on the line in terms of REIT. We don't have anything specific to report, but based on the assessor's valuation, it's under contract and it bringing about $100,000 just on that one project alone. So you can talk to the mayor offline.
Okay.
Great.
All righty.
All right.
Well,
See you all in about a half hour.
Yep.
Yeah.
we'll call this meeting adjourned. Thank you.